good morning to all of you. I must say I'm really impressed coming in this meeting room and really seeing all that interest really on your part in this work on the cost-benefit analysis. And really that tells me that somehow we have really made a big step forward in changing the culture around our policy and how we will implement this policy in the coming years. As we have heard already from many speakers before me, one important objective that cohesion policy has in the current programming period is to improve the quality of the investment. And the cost-benefit analysis is one of the key instruments which is now available to improve the quality of decision-making in relation to major projects. I do not want to cover the same ground as speakers before me who have explained the importance and the key elements of the updated guide on CBA. But instead of that, I would like to talk about one different aspect of the new guide, and which is the collaborative manner in which this document was prepared. DG REGIO was aware some time ago that the CBA guide completed in 2008 in its first version, though a very good and useful document, and also widely used, could benefit from some updating and perhaps a different way of presenting the messages. The focus of cohesion policy has changed since 2008 and gives a greater emphasis to knowledge economy, to the smart growth question, to climate change, low carbon development, and so on. As a focus of investment has changed, so too should the guidance we provide about how to prepare the projects for the EU support. At the same time, we wanted to have a document which was as much user-friendly as possible. And we decided to include case studies which are illustrations of how this cost-benefit analysis can work in practice. As you know, DG REGIO and JASPERS have been working closely together for nearly a decade now. And it made sense for the two to come together, as we frequently do on many issues, to pool our knowledge and experience to produce what we new member states wanted from us, namely a practical guide which contained the latest thinking about cost-benefit methodologies and also which covers a larger number of investment sectors than we were considering before. The cooperation between the Commission and JASPERS, and I would like to add here also our very valuable academic contributors about this guide, took some time. So we had a work over several years. The result is now a comprehensive document which covers a wide range of methodological issues, and the joint effort has produced what we believed is a very useful and practical document. There are already been considerable interest in it, including also, I must say, from outside of the European Union. I would like to thank all of those from the Commission, especially colleagues from DG REGIO, from JASPERS and our academic contributors who have participated in the work of updating the guide. I know this has been a major effort, but one which will have considerable benefits for all of those involved in the development of major projects in the future. The successful cooperation between JASPERS and the Commission about the CBA guide is for us the first step in what I consider to be a continuous, successful collaboration in other areas, especially concerning the development and appraisal of major investment projects. As you know, the regulation for the structural investment funds provides new options for member states for the appraisal of major projects. One of the major innovations is the possibility to make use of what is so-called the quality review by independent experts as a basis for the rapid approval for major projects. The Commission experts expects JASPERS to be the main and quite possibly also the only independent experts which will undertake this function. While this option of the IQR gives greater responsibility in the appraisal process to JASPERS, it will not be the solely responsible. Considerable coordination will still be needed between JASPERS and the Commission about many aspects of the process, which ranges from the agreement with member states about the initial strategy which guides the choice of the projects, down to the detailed issues about the appraisal methodology. We expect the intensive contacts which have been taking place over the recent years about these issues to continue also in the coming months and years. The work that JASPERS has been doing for nearly a decade now, providing advice about all aspects of the development of major projects to national administrations, will continue, and very probably will be expanded to include more member states than what we have at present. These two will require a joint effort between the JASPERS partners, the Commission and the member states. There are a number of important new initiatives which will be undertaken jointly by the EIB group and the Commission. I could mention the important developments concerning the investment plan announced by the Commission President Juncker, in particular in relation to the new FC funds and the advisory hub for technical assistance, both of which will be in operation in the second half of this year. If I can sum up the cooperation between JASPERS and the Commission about the cost-benefit analysis guide is just one part of a far wider and very ambitious program of joint actions between the EIB group and the European Commission. And this cooperation is well established. It has been very successful, and it will be developed further in the future with the common aim of making EU cohesion policy as effective as possible. Thank you very much from my part. I will now hand back to our lady in the chair.
Thank you, Rudolf, for all the nice words. And if I look in the auditorium, I must say I'm also impressed about the amount of people. I know many familiar faces, and some of them are new. I first thought that because of the heat outside, some people might have joined inside here, but it's not true, because all of you had to register first, and only the registered ones are let in. And the security probably is super critical today. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you have heard already a lot from, in particular, Mrs. Vigieva, but also from Mr. Niesler about the cooperation between JASPERS and DG REGIO. And indeed, we work already 10 years together. Actually, we will have a big anniversary meeting later in this year in November, details to follow. And we will continue to do so also for the present programming period. For the years in front of us, we will concentrate on 3 pillars. First, advisory on major projects, as you all know. Second, and Rudolf was already quite precise on that, the independent quality review for major projects. And third, capacity building and knowledge transfer. I don't want to bother you too much with how many projects we have done, how many completion notes, etc. But I think on one slide of Mrs. Vicheva, you also have seen that the Commission had to work on, as far as I remember, 930 projects in the old period. And we have been involved in a substantial number of these 938 as well. Speaking about, I don't want to speak at all about advisory or independent quality review. I want to concentrate more on the third pillar, which is capacity building and knowledge transfer, because also today's meeting, today's conference is illustrating that. The new guide is, so to say, the latest fruit of our intensive and successful cooperation with the Commission. And it also marks a new step in the way we share our joint knowledge and experience. And by saying that, I don't mean that we want to, instead of a small and compact completion note, that we want to write books with 358 pages all the time. But I also looked inside, and it's a lot of information covered, in particular also the, I think, 7 case studies, which are, I heard already from some of you in the break, which are quite useful. For more or less a decade now, JASPERS has been connecting people, competencies and money, more or less to improve millions of lives and bring the European Union closer together. And we managed to do so exclusively by our technical assistance provision. In other words, knowledge is more or less our bread and butter. The type of knowledge that we are able to provide is a combination of elements which not necessarily belong normally together. Because we combine engineering expertise, for instance in transport, water, energy or IT sectors, with both an in-depth knowledge of European Commission rules and regulations, but also very concrete experience in project preparation in the meantime, almost 20 countries. In a short, we are able to bridge economic, engineering, institutional and cultural gaps at once. And this is more or less the value of what we can bring in, and we are willing to further do to the European ambition. I think Mr. Sartori mentioned something like that we all learn and build on experience. This is exactly what is also valid for JASPERS and what we want to even market and bring to all of you in a better way. Gradually, we are looking to add a new dimension, that means an academic dimension to our expertise. And again, the guide, what you see today, is a good example. It was prepared in close collaboration between DG REGIO, JASPERS and the University of Milan. And in this context, of course, I'm very happy to have today Professor Florio, Professor Johansen, Professor Picot and Mr. Sartori, although not professor as we all know now, but I'm sure this will happen a bit later. All very well known, and we have seen that now in practice, academics in the field of cost-benefit analysis. Traditionally, JASPERS has always provided technical assistance on individual projects, offering managing authorities, sometimes final beneficiaries, assistance from start to the finish of the project preparation. Of course, we'll continue to do so because it's a very efficient way of building capacities across entire regions and countries. However, in nowadays times, fast-changing times of social media, and our knowledge could be better used on a more global scale. And we thought about publishing educational and comprehensive guides, such as the one we are presenting today, but also by launching national and cross-country training capacity building programs on specific topics, such as state aid, but also CBA, of course, or climate change, to mention just 3 of them. And we might also include some e-learning tools, tutorials and videos to make them accessible on a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week basis via our networking platform. You will hear a bit more about the plans in this respect and the planned activities in the afternoon from Massimo Mara. As you all can see, I mean, we have a lot of fascinating challenges in front of us. But for now, I think we should continue with the seminar, and I would like to give the floor to, well, I can say also a long-time partner of JASPERS here at DG REGIO, Witold Villak, who will give us an overview on key changes in CBA methodologies for 2014 to 20. And I must just add, I mean, that he had a slight problem with his leg. It's not because of a discussion with JASPERS, it's totally because of a sport event, as far as I know. Thank you.
No, now it's on. Actually, I hoped Katrina, they would call me professor as well, you know, in order to increase my self-confidence. But obviously you didn't, so I have to go with what I have and to present you a few changes from the point of view of the Commission. And if you have any questions, I'm sure Massimo Florio is very ready to reply to any issues linked to CBA complexity. First of all, where is the slide? First of all, it's the most objective and rigorous tool to assess the quality of projects. And it's not only for the Commission, it's not only that we are the bad guys in the Commission who doesn't want you to draw European funding, it's also for your own benefit, for your own regions, for your own countries, that you really plan. So it's also a tool of managing authorities vis-à-vis beneficiaries to make sure that their projects are the best ones to be supported in a given time frame. It gives indication whether the project needs EU financing and whether it's financially sustainable in short and long term, which is also important in terms of infrastructure maintenance in later years. It allows for measuring quantifiable impacts of the project on its target area by monetizing mainly direct effects. So you have to first see what is the impact on the project, to define it, to define all the stakeholders, and then to see what are the aggregate benefits on this area compared to the cost to the society to be incurred. And for that reason, we really pleaded for simplification in this period, because we think that it should really become a real tool in managing the projects and also in the selection process to compare projects between one another. And I know in some countries you also kind of introduce CBA elements, cost-benefit analysis CBA elements into the project selection criteria, also for smaller projects, of course with some necessary simplification because of the scale. And while talking about the impact, of course it's about aggregate benefits, so we also have to make a judgment. This picture shows you that sometimes in some cases there are some people who might be worse off the project, and it's our task, of course, to make sure that these concerns are also addressed. I don't know if you know what's the origin of this picture actually, which country it was taken. Very good, excellent, excellent. So I'm not sure to what extent we can have this practice here in Europe, but I think it's an interesting way how to speed up appropriation procedures. Methodology for cost-benefit analysis. There was a bit scary slide about number of pages, but I want to assure you that at the end, actually, it's not so bad. Because for the first time, these legislators, which means member states, Commission and the European Parliament, decided that some basic elements of the cost-benefit analysis are included in the legislation. So like that, these are basic rules which have to be followed. And these basic rules have only 15 pages, which is good news. On top of that, of course, we prepared the cost-benefit analysis guide with many examples in order to facilitate the direct application of the CBA rules into your projects. But the basic rules which you have to follow are included in these 15 pages, which I encourage you to read. It's in the Implementing Regulation number 207 from 2015. Why was that? Because we, as also Professor Florio rightly said, there was a problem of consistency, which you also saw in a number of projects from 2007-13 period. So we thought that we need to, at least on the basic level, on basic rules, we need to assure more rigor and homogeneity in the way the CBA is applied in specific sectors. But of course, we left also some space for national frameworks, national cost-benefit analysis frameworks, so you can adjust basic parameters such as financial discount rate per specific sector or social discount rate to reflect your specific situation in your country. But what we plead is that it is justified and it's agreed with the Commission at the start of the program period, so that we are not taken by surprise when seeing specific projects. But we do encourage you, if you want to deviate in some of these elements, please come along to us, and we'll, together with JASPERS, assess these proposals, and we'll see, well, I'm sure we'll find some consensus. Implement regulation, just a short slide on the structure. So it's general principles which actually do not really change in terms of objectives of cost-benefit analysis, and in terms of methodological principles such as the incremental method, so scenario with and without the project, and elements required in CBA. As we also said, cost-benefit analysis we also extended to the actually what the project is about. So with the feasibility study, with the option analysis, with the scope of the project to be subject to CBA. So we identified these 7 steps. The idea was that we at least we want to get clear information from you. So why this option has been selected, how was the method. So there are basic rules to follow when you actually go from the project concept into the final product, which is the cost-benefit analysis for the selected investment option that you propose to be financed by the European Regional Development Fund or Cohesion Fund. In this area of the project context, objectives, identification, first of all, timing of CBA, it's recommended that it is indeed done as early as possible in the project preparation phase, so that it really becomes a management tool and allows for any adjustments. The issue of linking the project with the OP was already mentioned, so that's also quite emphasized in our recommendations, and also in the application form where you have to explain project objectives, how do they link with the operational program. That's also why the guide has 5 main sectors, because we thought that in these sectors we'll have major projects. For policy reasons, we didn't want to promote large investments in culture or in health because of different policy considerations like deinstitutionalization, etc. So that's why the guide is fine-tuned to the cohesion policy 1420. In case of demand analysis, we thought a major issue that we were confronted with was the impact of different projects like the airports on one another. And in that case, there is a more mention about the current infrastructure endowment and other planned expected projects in order to make sure that demand analysis, which is at the core of concerns also of the European Court of Auditors, and this is why also we increased more emphasis on how the infrastructure will be used in the implementation, in the operational phase. This you really have to pay a bit more attention in 1420, because we need to have projects which really bring results on the ground. And option analysis, the main principles, how to approach to the option analysis, and how to convince us that the option that you put forward is the best one. These elements, financial analysis, these elements have not changed. So they are the same. The 2 financial profitability indicators on investment, on capital, they remain the same, and the modalities between them also are the same. With, of course, the financial net present value, we also recommend that you do it for the investor in some cases, and also you can even divide it per level of governance. New elements in financial analysis, maybe not new elements, but new emphasis, if you like. The requirements for specific values of financial profitability indicators are included in the secondary legislation, where you have, of course, the requirements, how they should behave before you grant, after you grant. We decided, based on some analysis of long-term bonds, we decided to reduce financial discount rate from 5% in 713 to 4%. But again, it is the national approaches are possible if justified. So if you really want to have different financial discount rate, please come forward with your national guidelines. And then we can agree on different approach in justified cases. We put more emphasis on ensuring financial viability, stability in the project implementation operation because of observed problems. And in case of pre-existing infrastructure, we also require some kind of financial stability analysis in relation to the beneficiaries. So it's not only project-based, but if there's an infrastructure before, then you also have to show that the beneficiaries is financially sustainable. Also, based on experience 2007-13 period, we've introduced some provisions about how to deal with profitable investments, like product investments, in some cases perhaps also wind farms. So there's a bit more strict line of highly profitable investments. And the rationale is as well that we want to move, for such investment, we want to move into financial engineering, financial instruments. So in that sense, that if there is no need for the grant, then such projects should rather benefit from financial instruments. As you know, we plead to double financial instruments in 14-20 period. And with the same logic, the calculation of financial net present value for private investor also has to be in certain cases verified in order to avoid overcompensation. Financial analysis in the 7-13 period, you could use current prices or constant prices. In the next period, we recommend use of constant prices. We'll have as well obligatory reference periods, also to avoid the lengthy discussions about whether the project should have 32 or 30 years of reference period. So in the legislation, you have reference periods per sector, but this will be in the next slide. And the financial analysis of major projects should be carried out taking account the rules set out in Section 3 of the Commission Delegated Regulation for projects generating net revenue in the operational phase. There you have rules about determination of cost, revenues, and residual value, and also compliance with polluter pays principle and full cost recovery and affordability. On these elements, JASPERS will develop further afternoon. And the one thing, the financial analysis is required for major projects. So if you use flat rate revenue percentages, it doesn't mean you don't have to calculate financial profitability indicators. You still have to do it for major projects. This is the Annex 1 of the Delegated Regulation 480, so it's applicable for all projects, not only major projects, but that's the reference periods that we recommend for specific sectors. As we try to be quite comprehensive in setting the reference periods for all possible sectors. In case of financial analysis versus calculation of EU grant, as you know, we have introduced simplification in Article 61, so you can choose between three methods, which is the way as it has been done 713, which is calculation of discounted net revenue per project, where you analyze the financial situation of a given project. Then we have two methods which are sometimes sector-based, so which can be proposed for specific sectors. It's either you use flat rates net revenue percentages, which are defined in the Common Provisions Regulations, and we recently, as there was a provision regulation, recently added the flat rate for research and development and innovation sector, so we proposed flat rate of 20%. It's the delegated act which was issued in June 2015. Or you can choose the third method, which is actually at the time of programming, where you actually combine the flat rate revenue percentage with a co-financing rate at the priority axis. So you have a choice how to approach the calculation of EU grant, because as you know, it has the net revenues have to be estimated net revenues have to be deducted from eligible cost. But of course, we are not. It's not the purpose itself. I think there's some cases, as well, Professor explained, there may be some trade-off between financial revenues, financial analysis, and the economic analysis, as we can see, for instance, in a number of countries emerging. So we want, of course, to have a conscious decision about the tariff policy, about revenues you want to draw from the project, in order not to minimize the benefits of the project. So, for instance, situation in Portugal, which is touched by crisis. In addition, if you have revenues, then you have motorways which are hardly used. So it's not also the purpose of the cohesion policy to have infrastructure which is not optimally used. So what we plead also is a kind of trade-off, of course, in that respect. In water systems, we expect more rigor due to the ex-ante conditionality, 6.1, which requires that the tariff systems should be in line with Article 9 of the Water Framework. And the last thing is how to approach state aid projects, where there is a possibility of applying Article 61 at national level, if you think so, and then because we saw as well the appropriate state aid should also be checked from the point of view of whether it's not overcompensating the private investors. Well, not this direction. Right. As regards the economic analysis, we tried some simplification as well, but more we focused on consistency of economic analysis in different projects. So there is some simplification in terms of conversion factors that we allow that they can be one if there's absence of significant market distortions. David explained well about this willingness to pay and the fact that we should not use financial revenues from the functional analysis, but we should really apply the willingness to pay concept. We propose social discount rate 5% for cohesion member states and 3% for others. But again, the different social discount rates, if justified, can be proposed by the member states in your national CBA guidelines. The calculation of the economic performance indicators, that stays the same. More or less, there are no innovations there. So ENPFA will never lie to you, and benefit cost ratio, perhaps it will, as Professor Florio explained. The main idea is the main economic benefits per sector to be considered, which are included in the implementing regulation, which we would plead that you will really use. They can be complemented if justified in this, by the project specificities, but we really wanted that the projects can be really compared by one another by comparing specific benefits. And we have a case that some member states pleaded for simplified economic analysis in special cases for projects driven by compliance. So we also have a provision on that in the implementing regulation. So on these benchmarks, as I say, you have to provide justification as the member states if you want to deviate, and you have to assure that they are consistently used across similar projects in the same country, region, or sector. And as you see, we ask you to provide your own benchmarks if you want, possibly at the start of the operational programs, and then to apply it consistency project appraisal at national level. In the case of simplified economic analysis, we offer that, but we don't think it's going to be used quite oftenly. But we can imagine some projects which are driven by compliance, like ERTMS systems, that they could apply this, where you don't really have to monetize the economic benefits, but you still undertake a kind of cost-effectiveness analysis for this project to make sure that it's a good investment for EU. And this is an example of the economic benefits per sector. So you see it's from the Implementing Act, and then Guide as well is further developing on that. So this, we would really like to see projects subject to those sectors, subsectors, that they really analyze those benefits in these projects. In terms of risk assessment, sensitivity analysis stays more or less the same like in 713 period. We put more emphasis on having risk assessment as something managerial tool to analyze risks for the projects. That's why we put more emphasis on qualitative risk analysis, including measures for risk mitigation and risk matrix. And probabilistic risk analysis is optional only if there's residual risk exposure and it's significant, then you do these Monte Carlo simulations and other things. And we also propose minimum risks to be taken into account per sector from Implementing Act. And we also encourage you to have national risk registers to facilitate risk assessment of beneficiaries, because as you will see from the list, some risks will be common to all beneficiaries, and actually the managing authorities should undertake all the steps also in the framework of ex-ante conditionalities, which are horizontal, so for public procurement, for EIA, for state aid issues. So for instance, procurement risks, procedural delays, this should be as well somehow. The mitigation measures should be also undertaken, ideally, by the managing authority to help beneficiaries to handle all these risks with projects. And that's all from my side. It was just to focus on main elements, because, of course, so the documentation is quite heavy. Thank you for your attention, and looking to some questions. Looking forward.
Okay, so we've come to the end of our three speakers. We do have some time. You should have had a bit of energy from the exotic biscuits. Does anybody have a question? I mean, that was obviously... Oh, yes, the gentleman there. Thank you very much.
Łukasz Jaworski, Minister of Economy, Poland. Mr. Wilak indicated an important issue of project with state aid, which should be financed on the basis of state aid rules. And this is actually a certain problem, because we have competing, let's say, competing rules of state aid law and rules which are implemented on those 15 pages, which are general rules not for projects with state aid, but with projects with net revenue. So this is another group of projects. So actually, the state aid law also have an ambition to give the methodology of calculating the EU support, not to overcompensate the beneficiary. So what should be the general approach? Should we combine both approaches, or maybe we should assume that, for example, that the approach in the state aid law is satisfactory to avoid the overcompensation of the project? What is your approach? Maybe this should be a question mainly to Mr. Villak and maybe also to other speakers which are willing to answer. Thank you.
Well, I quoted the phrase from the regulation, common provision regulations, because at that time we didn't know how the state aid modernization process will look like. So we somehow hinted that you can use the Article 61 also for state aid projects, but it's not obligatory. And I know that, as you know, there's also a paragraph on this individual verification of financing needs for state aid non-SME projects, where you just have to prove that some analysis of self-financing of the project has been undertaken, and if in some cases stated rules might be even more stricter than our rules. In that sense, you have to prove that such analysis was done. You don't have necessarily to apply Article 61 to those projects. So it's a matter of judgment there. But as I say, we have a strong emphasis on using financial instruments. Therefore, as you know, for that reason, we don't have much appetite to over-finance projects which normally fall under state aid.
Was there anybody else who's in the floor who wanted any other, or nobody wants to add anything to that? No? Yes? Okay. We have lots of, the lady right in the back corner, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Katarina Hobzova, DG Environment. I would have a question for you, Witold, as well, because you mentioned in your presentation interesting point, but I think it was which is valid, and you say that CBA should be done as soon as possible in the project preparation phase, and the demand analysis is are to be seen as a critical issue for preparing of CBA. And I think that at least for me it would be interesting what you mean by the project preparation phase. It's meant as a project preparation, as a project application for co-financing, or as a project as such, you know, which basically would exist irrespectively of co-financing or not, because, you know, the project as such might have a longer history, yeah? Especially transport infrastructure. It's basically the project preparation takes sometimes 10 years, or the steps are being taken sometimes even 10 years before, you know, it gets it forms then the project as subject for co-financing. So this would be, I think, at least interesting or important, because I'm afraid that we have seen the cases in the programming period 2007-2013 that in some of the cases then the CBA, if it is done I would say at the end of the process, is basically just a windows dressing exercise, you know, to justify something which was already planned, you know, a long time ago. So though I understand that in this programming period, you know, we have the issue or condition of not completed projects to be submitted, but still, I think it's important, yeah.
Okay, so just to sum up, you are looking for a kind of how do you define, what is being defined as a project preparation phase? Can you clarify that?
I mean, what we wrote in the Implementing Act, which was kind of general recommendation, of course, is that the CBA should be carried out as soon as possible in the project preparation phase, usually at the end of the preliminary design stage of the project, so where you can really legitimately consider any investment options or different ways of addressing the problem you want to address. So, of course, ideally it should be quite early in the project concept phase, but we know that in some sectors these projects require very long preparation time. So, especially in transport, that may be that there's some historical approach that will be taken there. But what we want to make sure, I think, that the line is that at the end we are all convinced that the option which is proposed is the best one to be financed. But what we present here is, that, of course, how it should look like, and that we should really avoid situations, as you say, that actually cost-benefit analysis is only prepared when and just beneficially realized that the project became major, and then it produces some kind of analysis for the sake of European Commission requests. So our idea was to really put it in the early stage of the decision-making process from the beneficiary on whether and to implement specific investment option. I don't know, Massimo, do you want to complement something, Davide? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I also want to add a comment on that. The idea is to have the CBA as a sort of ongoing process. So to apply the CBA's principle and approach from the beginning of the project preparation, and then in order to select the most promising option, and then you can update the original estimates when you have more refined data, and you can carry out a full-fledged cost-benefit analysis. So do not think about cost-benefit analysis as a punctual momentum but as a way of thinking and an approach that you can adapt from. The important thing is to introduce this way of thinking from the beginning when you start with project preparation. And then you can adapt into the course your cost-benefit analysis as soon as you have more refined data. And in principle, the cost-benefit analysis that you include in the application form that asks for the money to the Commission is the one that comes once the option analysis have been already carried out. If you have already identified the most promising technical solution. I hope I tried to clarify the issue.
Thank you. There were hands here, but there was hands here first. So I will come to you, the lady there, but I think there was somebody, yes, the lady here. Thank you.
Yeah. Daniela Gregg from the Managing Authority of Malta. I have a question. You have been mentioning that repeatedly that the CBA guide is mostly focusing on major projects. Now, in the case of Malta, for obvious geographical reasons, the major projects are limited. So we tend to set a threshold as a managing authority for projects to submit a CBA when they surpass that threshold, and at the moment it's 5 million euro in cost. Does the CBA guide cater for such situations where you have smaller projects that still need to have a CBA? Does it cater for some sort of simplification or proportionate approach towards such projects?
Well, the answer is yes. Obviously, it is a matter of, well, the principles are the same, the techniques are the same. Obviously, it is a matter of proportionality. If you have a very small project, building all this analysis probably not worth. Something more simplified is needed. But in principle, the answer is yes. Would you really spend out of your pocket 5 million euros without thinking whether it is beneficial to you to do so? So, I suppose before spending 5 million, you think what you are doing with your money. So this is taxpayers' money, so why not?
So you have to read the 364 pages. Sorry. Can't get away with that. Hang on, did you put your hand up quite a long time ago? No. There was can I just take I'm trying to be very, very good in terms of order. The lady there with the short hair, thank you.
Thank you. Stia Zsuzsa from Hungary. And I can't resist to make one comment to this question, where to do the CBA. I think this is the question which can be raised just due to the fact that we keep confusing CBA as a methodology, as a tool which we are using, as CBA as a document which has to be submitted as an appendix to the major project application. I think, as it has been said, CBA as a methodology, as a process, should be applied from the beginning of the project preparation, and CBA document, which includes financial analysis as a separate chapter, you do as late as possible prior to the major project application, because you want to have the latest available data on the cost estimates. So you want to ask money for as precise as possible cost estimate, but the CBA analysis as a methodology, I think, as is suggested by the guy, has to be done from the beginning. So that's just a comment. The other thing with respect to the state aid rules, our understanding is that the state aid rule regulates the maximum limit of public contribution, no matter whether EU or non-EU. Therefore, our understanding is that the state aid rules are the stronger rules because those limit the public contribution, and they limit on the account that what the project can raise or can maintain under market conditions. So I don't think providing less public contribution would allow a financially sustainable project. Thank you.
Thank you. Can anybody give the man with the slightly ailing leg a break? Do we have any questions for our other two panelists, or are you all just on him? There's a gentleman there with the red tie. You put your hand up. Do you?
Yep.
Yes. Go on.
I'm afraid my question is also addressed to Vito.
Okay. Don't be afraid. This is what he's here for too. Okay. Go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. My name is Kurt Bungartz from the European Court of Auditors. I come from the performance audit or value for money audit side. We appreciate, obviously, that the methodology for CBA has been updated, has been revised recently by the Commission and by JASPERS. However, what we see is a risk, and that is my question to the panelists, perhaps Vito, perhaps others, whether you also see that risk that however good a CBA analysis is for a major project or even for a smaller project like in Malta, it is too often used also by the beneficiary organizations in the sense that when we ask the questions, would you not have had chances to find out more cost-optimal or more cost-effective solution to a certain problem, say in the area of energy, the area of transport, that because a CBA was done, it was presented, it was approved, it was done in the right, according to the right methodology, that it is too often used then as an excuse to say, well, sorry, there was a CBA, the CBA was positive, we received up to 85% by the European taxpayer. From our perspective, it made a lot of sense to put this project into operation. What is your opinion about this? This is, of course, also linked to the question, should co-financing rates in the light of a CBA analysis be more easier adapted? Meaning, should there always be in the 75 or 80 or 85% public grant by the European taxpayer? I mean, is the Commission considering to change that? Thank you.
Okay, who would like to come back on the first question? Is that something that the gentleman here on my left would come? Okay, thank you very much.
Well, cheating is part of the human nature. We know that. The point is how to professionally deal with cheaters. Now, the fact that in the guide there are both financial analysis and economic analysis, and that the Commission is not very happy to finance projects, to fund with a grant projects with a high financial return, while the Commission is happy to fund projects with a high economic returns, creates a dilemma in the potential cheater. Because if they exaggerate, for instance, their forecast of future benefit, think, for example, to traffic forecast for a highway with a toll. So, if you inflate the forecast, automatically you'd inflate the revenues. This would create a high financial performance, and at that point somebody at the Commission would tell you, well, this is a project probably that doesn't need to be helped. Okay? So, at the same time, if you want to cheat the Commission in saying, in telling the Commission this is a financial disaster, and we need your help because it is going to be a financial disaster, that would have a consequence on some aspects of the economic analysis, because if you exaggerate with the idea of the financial disaster, you will end up with also an economic disaster. And at that point, the Commission will say, well, but why we have to? So it is a matter of check and balance. And in a sense, the guide is more astute than you can think, because if you exaggerate one way, you risk to go on the other way around. Apart from this built-in mechanism, I think that professionalism should be also on the side of those who read the documents, and an experienced evaluator would say, well, I'm not very sure that 1 million people per second will actually use this high-speed train. Perhaps it will be 1 million per year, not 1 million per second. So you need some experienced people, not just to write the documents, but also to read the documents. And I think this is also the role of independent evaluation, perhaps the role of JASPERS, and so on.
Okay, if there's anything else? So, yes, no? Then what about you asked about co-financing? Should it be more easily adapted? That was the second question.
I mean, the co-financing rates are always maximum level of co-financing, but of course to facilitate financial management of the programs, sometimes the member states tend to put maximum rates, and then, of course, they can lower it in the implementation. But I think, I think these are maximum rates which are allowed. But of course, for some projects, the effective rates are much lower for stated projects, etc., or the others. So, in that sense, always the real co-financing rates are much lower. If you look at major projects, from the total cost to EU funds, the average co-financing rate was 50% of these 1,000 projects that we have in 7-13 period. The effective co-financing rate, meaning the share of costs from EU versus all the costs of the beneficiaries, was only 50%. So it was not so high. And as you also rightly that there are some investments which are so needed that they can justify themselves. That's why next to the economic analysis, we also recommend to have a closer look at the unit cost issues, and we are also developing kind of review together with JASPERS on how to address the issue of unit costs, which would avoid that some investments are a bit perhaps oversized or cost too much in relation to what they really deliver to the society.
Just before, because we're approaching lunchtime, I'm just letting it run on a little bit because there do seem to be a lot of questions. Any questions about that relationship, or you all just feel warm and fuzzy about the Commission and JASPERS? Is there anything? Look at these fine gentlemen. Is there anything? It's very technical, I understand that. You had a lot of information in his PowerPoint. Anything else? Did I miss anybody? I saw quite a few hands up before, and I don't know whether I have terrified anybody into silence. Look how far away these men are sitting from me. It's just staggering. There's a gentleman here. Yes.
Yes, Kabarakis, let me thank you first for this beautiful presentation, DG REGIO, European Commission. I have a practical question, and I'm very happy we have the legislators and the economists here. Can you use CBA for an already completed project, and would that make sense?
Professor?
We did this for DG REGIO, for the ex-post evaluation of 10 major projects completed around 20 years ago. The objective of this ex-post evaluation was exactly to learn what happened. So sometimes once upon a time there was a cost-benefit analysis about a underground railway in Madrid, or a wastewater treatment plant in Dublin. A positive decision was taken, and then what happened actually? So we rebuilt the analysis 20 years later to do that. At the World Bank, they do this systematically. For any project approval, there is a cost-benefit analysis at completion. So yes, Byron, thank you for the question. By the way, Byron Kabarakis was instrumental in the previous steps of this exercise. So you know that, and yes, I would recommend the Commission on a sample basis, not systematically, it would be too heavy, but on a sample basis to go back and see what happened. And there is something in the regulations that would help the Commission to do that. What you discover when you go back over time? Obviously, you discover that many things were not as forecasted. Obviously, you discover that. But the true point is you can start and understand whether the deviations from the forecasts were because the world went not as expected, so there were exogenous shocks, or whether there were problems built in the analysis itself. And distinguishing between ignorance and unexpected shocks is crucially in building our understanding of...
Okay, we're drawing to a close. See, you've been really active. This side of the room has been silent and very calm.
They were tweeting.
They were tweeting. You were. Oh, thank you very much. That is fine. That's actually quite a good way of splitting a conference, isn't it? Half of you tweet, half of you ask questions. You good people, is there anything else that... Yes, there's... Oh, there we go. Last questions from the lady right at the end of this front row here. Thank you.
Suada Mustabegovic, IB2 Croatia. This guide introduced a flat rate. Could you explain or just recommend, do you recommend flat rate or funding gap? Or on another way, my question is pro and contra for flat rate or a funding gap? Thank you.
And flat rate were proposed in the regulation, common provision regulation, so it's not only for major projects, it's for any project which is revenue generating. So in Article 61, legislator foreseen 3 ways of assessing, of taking into account the potential net revenues of operations. So, I mean, and the legislator has not foreseen, it has foreseen freedom for the managing authority, for the member state to decide which method is the most appropriate in the specific conditions of the sector, or etc. So in that sense, but we always said that the member state should take as well the sound financial management applies anywhere. So in that sense, I don't think because the flat rates, the managing authority doesn't have the incentive to overcompensate projects if the flat rate does not reflect real profitability, etc. So in that sense, we would also want to have kind of conscious decision of the managing authority why to go for simplification in respect of flat rates. But for major projects, as I said, the legislator still requires financial analysis, as I say, because it has different functions also to see if there are sufficient cash flows every year, etc. So there are other aspects of financial analysis which are still important for major projects because they are major projects, so they involve major risks from the point of view of implementation, as we can see in the current period in terms of delays, etc., financial problems. So in that sense, it's still useful to have fully fledged financial analysis of the major project, even if there is certain simplification proposed in the legislation as regards the EU grant. And I think main simplification will come from that it's not necessary to monitor revenues after the implementation if you use flat rate percentage.